All right, good morning. So every month I do this kind of free gathering slash coaching called First Fridays that you guys are here for, in the hopes to try and talk about things that really matter to us and to share some of my own experiences in the hopes that somebody else will be able to take some of that and understand themselves better and maybe have more tools in order to make the choices to create the life that they want. So I did last month this conversation centered around empathy and codependence and how growing up in chaos, whether that was because we had parents who were struggling mentally or with addiction or anything that made our home life really unbalanced, that can create a really deep sense of empathy in that child growing up in that environment. So, this part two is meant to build on what we talked about in part one. So, in part one, we talked about how that chaos creates that highly empathetic child, how when you grow up in environments where there is addiction and mental health struggles and emotional volatility or even unpredictability, you learn really quickly how to read the room and read other people. You learn to track tone shifts and facial expressions, body language and energy, and you learn to try to anticipate what's going to happen next. You also learn how to adjust yourself to create this um, better sense of peace, right? You try and be the thing that brings the peace about. So before long, you become incredibly skilled at understanding other people. And in part one, we talked about this ability isn't a personality trait so much that just appeared one day. It was really a survival skill. And many of the most compassionate, intuitive, emotionally intelligent people I know grew up in some of this type of chaos, the kind that produces adults who are incredible listeners, natural helpers. They're deeply loyal friends. Hi, Michelle. And people who care about others in profound ways. But we also talked about the other side of that gift. When empathy grows in environments that felt unsafe, it often becomes paired with other things that show up when we're adults. So when when we have that dysregulation, we become we tend to become hypervigilant, right? Hypervigilant about other people's emotional states, about what could happen next so that we can be ready and plan or maybe like do our monkey dance that helps everything be better. We have over responsibility for other people's feelings. Fear of conflict is huge. Guilt for having needs. We're just supposed to be there to make everything run smoothly for everyone else. And by doing that, that keeps us safe. But it's not really a true way of taking up space and being a part of the conversation and showing up. So this is where the codependency piece starts to come in. And it's not a weakness, it's just another adaptation that once helped you survive. So, in this first part, we talked about how many empathetic people become experts at holding everything together, how they become the ones that smooth things over. They tend to try to absorb the tensions and manage emotions and anticipate people's needs and try to prevent problems before they happen. And this brings us to the next question because understanding how these patterns formed is really powerful. It's very self-empowering. But the next question that is usually asked is, how does this actually play out in our lives as adults? How does it shape the relationships we choose? Why do some of us find ourselves repeatedly in dynamics where we're the one holding everything together? Why do the very traits that make us loving, loyal, and compassionate sometimes pull us into draining relationships? And that's what it's those relationships that I want to talk about today, because they show up with parents, they show up with adult children, they show up with friends, they show up with business partners. It's not always the romantic relationships, right? And as you begin to become more aware, you start to see these patterns that may be running to a lesser degree in these other relationships. So, and once we start understanding the patterns, something important is possible because we can stop blaming ourselves. We can start recognizing that this system is something we learn to survive. But once we see it clearly, that's when we can start to change it. So that summarizes a bit about what we talked about in part one. And if you didn't listen to part one yet, if you haven't listened to part one, I suggest going back after you listen to this one, or maybe even starting with that one and coming back to this if you're doing the recording. So if the idea is that this is all conditioning, and that though that high level of empathy is really a blessing in so many ways, there are other sides of that coin as adults that bleed into codependence that can really pull our life off of the path that we really know is possible for ourselves, the path that we really want to be on. And I'll just tell you, for me personally, I know that the most obvious place that this started for me was with my mother, because my mother was wildly emotionally dysregulated. And as a small child, I remember seeing her. She was often crying. She was also often fighting with family members. And she was very much saw herself as the black sheep of the family, of um, the victim of everyone else. And as a little kid, I was both a bit afraid of how her big emotional reactions to things, but I also didn't understand what was happening in the adult realm. Like, I didn't understand what was going on. So she made me her confidant, and over time I started to get pulled into this idea of, loyalty to my mother, because loyalty was a really big factor in how the manipulation starts, right? So my mother would, she would do all these crazy things. Like, she would show up be invited to family events and show up and just like use it as a time to try and air out her grievances with everyone and just blow everything up. She would show up shot. She would go to jail. She would steal my grandmother's credit cards. Um, she started taking me to bars when I was like 15 or 16. But my mother was never accountable to any of her actions. She was just the victim of everything, and everyone just, was unfair to her. And my grandmother, over years and years, got framed as the authoritarian, right? Like, she was she actually was the one that's provided stability. She was the one that helped my mother get apartments. She was the one that, provided the safety net for my mother's antics. But she was framed as authoritarian. And so I ended up being stuck in this position where don't tell grandma what's happening, right? While my mother's life is, the police are showing up at the door, like I'm lying and hiding things that are happening at home until I just had a complete meltdown. So, but the thing is that she was so extreme that it wasn't as hard to see the pattern, to start to see that this was not sustainable. I couldn't do this. Like this was wildly unhealthy. And eventually I had enough. But the thing is that even though we see that conditioning, all of the conditioning around that, and loyalty is just a part, that was already installed. That was already set. So what we don't heal, we repeat. So the two real relationships, long-term relationships that I had in my early life were both just different versions of the relationship that I had with my mother. And that led to a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of self-judgment. But also it provided a real window for me to really see what these patterns are, to see what my patterns are, and to be able to start to shift them and question them and get more educated and find ways to do things differently. So I want to share with you the 5 traits that make you more susceptible to unhealthy relationships. Because a lot of times, you know, it's framed that if you are in an unhealthy relationship, especially romantic relationships, family relationships maybe aren't framed this way as much. We just deal with a ton of guilt and shame because guilt and shame is used to keep us in line. But in romantic relationships, it's if we end up in this type of relationship, it's framed as, we see ourselves as weak, right? Or maybe other people will see, if you're, people often say, I would never be in that kind of relationship, right? But you don't know that because this is a system that breaks a person down. So the people that are most likely to end up in unhealthy or unbalanced relationships are not weak. Number one, they're extremely loyal. So we don't give up easily, right? We stay, we want to work through things. We believe in commitment. The problem with this loyalty factor is that it's often demanded, but not always reciprocated. So it gets woven into the fabric. Oftentimes it gets woven into the fabric of the relationship. And the loyalty piece can be woven into the fabric of the relationship preemptively. So I'll give you an example of that. Someone might say to you when you're early on in the relationship, they might tell you a story about how they were in another relationship and that person talked about them behind their back and how devastating that was. And they might ask you to please promise me that you will never talk about me behind my back. And of course, we would immediately say, of course, I would never do that because the framing, the picture that we're seeing, that we're taking it as is being gossipy, right? Like telling people their personal business. But it is actually a type of setup because when things start becoming abusive, or controlling or manipulative, what do? We go to the people who are our support system, right? We go to that support system. And when we have been preemptively blocked from that, when we start to do that, now we go to our support system and start talking about like, I don't know what's happening. Like I'm being manipulated, or I feel like I'm starting to be isolated from my family and friends. I'm sorry. Now we get accused of talking behind their back. I knew you'd do this. You promised me. And it starts to lead to a lot of confusion because, wait, that's right. I did promise that. But is that what I'm doing? Am I talking behind their back? Well, I am talking about them and they aren't there. So maybe I am doing that. Maybe I am the one that's wrong. So loyalty gets used as a weapon, but it can only be used as a weapon for people who are extremely loyal. So the first trait is extreme loyalty, even when it's not appropriate. Number two is when we are deeply compassionate and empathetic, which is what we talked about in part one. We feel other people deeply. We understand pain. And we want to see the good. We want to see the good in people. What happens though is when we understand why someone may be acting out, we begin to muddle cause and effect and accountability. So, what I mean by that is we don't have relationships with intentions. We don't have relationships with, oh, they have a good heart. We have relationships with how the other person shows up. And what happens is if we allow and make excuses for someone because we know their pain, because we know what they've been through, if we make excuses for them, it creates this circular thinking and it creates distortions. We get confused. So think of it this way. Someone treats us badly, right? We have our feelings about that. We're upset about that. We have confusion about why, if they loved us or cared about us, why would they treat us this way? And then when we ask why, we start to think about, well, they have a lot of pain. They had trauma. We start to put put the as a friend said, we start to put the meat on the bones, right? We start to create this. All right, well, we know that they have trauma. We know that they've experienced pain. And usually they're very open with that and sharing that. And so then we move into, well, what can we do about it? So then we start to chastise ourselves or start to rise to the occasion by saying, well, we need to be more patient and we need to love them more. Because if we give them what they've never had, then they'll change because we see their potential. The potential's right there. So we excuse the behavior that hurts us. But every time we do that, we're giving ourselves away. We're not really involved in that. We're not really taking up space. It's almost like you could almost say it's a little egoic of us to think that we have the power to change someone else that is not actively looking to do that for themselves. Number three in our 5 traits that make us the most susceptible, relationships are a high priority for us. We really value our relationships. Connections matter, family matters, partnerships matter, especially for people who didn't grow up in the loving family that we wanted. We try to recreate that, and we can try to recreate it in our friendships, in our relationships, even in our work environments. And because we value them so much, they can be used against us because the fear of loss, and it circles back to the loyalty piece. Those two go together, right? Relationships are high priority, and I want to be loyal. If anybody has any questions or wants to add anything along the way, you can drop it in the chat. That would be great. Um, but I'm going to keep going. Number 4 is we have a high tolerance for discomfort. We handle a lot, we can adapt, we can endure. And we conflate tolerance with love. We often feel like we can often feel like we're the stronger one, right? So when you see somebody like doing their whole thing, we can feel like the stronger one. We're like, look, this person's, they're destroying this relationship. Look what they're doing. They're just going to ruin everything for themselves. But I'm stronger. So we start to take it on like, you know what? I can handle it. I can handle it. And we start to normalize behavior that should never be normalized. Number 5 is we have a high sense of responsibility in relationships. So we tend to step in and hold things together when things are going badly. We just need to try harder. You know, we can fix this. We can fix this. And this goes back to that kind of egoic aspect because why can we fix it? Why do we believe that we can fix it when it is another person? The only thing that we can change is ourself. But the truth is that we're terrified of change. We're terrified of confrontation. And we are trying our best to avoid the pain of what the truth is right in front of our face. So we will lie to ourselves. We will convince ourselves that we have more power than we do. We will make excuses for other people, all in order to not face and have to do things differently because we don't want to feel the potential loss. And I say potential loss because I have been very surprised over the years about relationships, whether they are parent child or whether they're romantic, that actually have the ability to heal and grow when one person stops the pattern. Relationships that seem so wildly toxic actually shift. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. But even if that's not the case, one way or the other, you get to see what you actually have. So often people are afraid to change because if I change, then are they going to leave me? Because really, everything we're doing is we're just trying to get love. I mean, that's at the root of all codependent behavior is we're trying to get love. So if I change, people may not love me anymore. But if I don't change, I'm living as though I know that people will leave me, that that is the truth, and I never get to actually feel safe and loved. So it's a kind of catch 22. It has to be resilient enough to be able to handle people changing, right? If you get married to someone, do you think that you're going to be the same person 20 years from now? Like the thing that makes relationships strong and resilient is that people can grow and change within it. So in this, when I'm afraid, when I'm afraid to stop over over functioning, if I'm afraid to stop over functioning in my relationships, if I'm afraid to stop taking on more than is mine, because I'm afraid that if I stop doing that, then people will leave me, then I am living as if that is true. Because I don't give people the opportunity to show me that that's not true. And I'm living in fear. So the only way to get a deeper relationship and to trust yourself more and to grow is to start doing things differently. You can't carry things that aren't yours. And it doesn't help you and it doesn't help the other person. The people that are most likely to end up in unhealthy dynamics are not the weakest people. They're the most loving, loyal, tolerant, and responsible people. That's why they were chosen. And if it's in family dynamics, a lot of times people get stuck because there's a feeling of obligation. There's a feeling of, you know, mother daughter relationships can get very complicated. And when there's a lot of guilt and shame involved, every time we try to show up for ourselves, if we're labeled as selfish, then there's a lot of fear there. And a lot of times, other family members can be rallied to bring you back in line if you start changing, right? That could be siblings, it could be the other parent. And it makes people confused about what is true and what isn't. So, put it this way, to give you an example, let's say somebody has a really toxic parent that they had to put out of their life. They had to go no contact with that parent because they were absolutely toxic. But if they have siblings, when that parent gets older and maybe they have to go into a care facility or something, maybe the other siblings did not cut that parent off. And now you are getting guilted possibly around you not being involved in handling this parent in this state. Everybody it's kind of like, you know how a crab trap works? You know, you put a piece of bait in and the crab goes in and latches on to the bait. And then the next crab goes in and the crab that latched on the bait latches onto that crab. And every crab that comes in, another crab latches onto it. And so Everyone could just walk out of this basket, but they can't because they're being pulled down by everyone else. And a lot of times in these dysfunctional family systems, that's what happens. So we have to start doing things differently, and we have to start trusting ourselves, and we have to start understanding that that is not only healthy for us, it's healthy for everyone involved. So why do empaths and codependents get pulled into these dynamics, especially in the relationships that they choose as adults? And the truth is that what feels familiar feels safe, even when it's unhealthy. So when we grow up in chaos, intensity becomes normal, unpredictability becomes expected, and emotional labor becomes your role. Doing the heavy emotional lifting just becomes normal. So as adults, calm relationships can feel boring. Stability can feel unfamiliar. Emotional roller coasters can feel like chemistry. And drama can feel like connection. So, this programming creates an unconscious pull towards people who are emotionally unavailable, people who are struggling in some way. They might be struggling with addiction, instability, their own unresolved wounds, because we know how to help that. Like, that's something we're good at. So we can be attracted to those people because we can help. Attracted to people who are highly reactive. Again, we know how to manage. We're good managers. And we love the underdog, right? We love that Cinderella story. The person in need of saving, fixing, or just needs a little support. And it feels familiar, and familiar feels good. And we've had good training, and we know how to show up here. Because this mirrors childhood, right? We know how to navigate it. And being needed is equated with being loved. And again, we're just trying to be loved. So this can actually create the perfect storm. And this is where things can get locked in a way that we wouldn't choose. So you have one person who avoids responsibility, takes more than they give, creates confusion, and lacks consistency. And then here we are, overgivers, always trying harder, always explaining things away, trying to hold everything together, and believing love can heal it all, right? Love heals all. What's interesting is someone said this to me, and it just kind of scrambled my brain in a second. And it was one of those things that are so obvious, but you never really consciously thought about it until someone says it. And they said, not everyone wants to be better. And while I can't imagine that, I can't imagine not wanting to be better. That makes sense. So imagine how many times we give of ourselves. We give more than we ever wanted to give, right? We give what we want, and then more gets demanded and more gets demanded because we taught people that this is our role. And then when that happens, we feel unseen and unloved. We end up in this role that actually makes us feel more unloved. Because the more we give, because every time we give, especially when we give more than we ever intended to give, because now it's being demanded. Now we have to. The feeling is we have to keep the peace or whatever it is. Every time we do that, every time we give more, we feel like it's because we love the person, like that they will equate our sacrifice with love. But they don't. So we can't understand why the more we give, the less we get. But we go back to that part where we don't want to face that. We don't want to face that because that means we need to make some new choices. And we try to avoid that at all costs. So we make excuses and we go through the pattern again. And every time we do that, though, I want you to understand that every time we do that, we weaken ourselves because we create a neural pathway that is circular. And that circular system keeps us stuck because every time we get hurt or see what's wrong, we then ask the question, why is this happening? How could someone that loves someone treat them in this way? And then we go, oh, I know why, because of their patterns, because of their, oh, I'll have to just be more patient and be better and love them more. And then it all repeats and repeats. And we get more and more confused. We get more and more unclear about what reality is and what someone else's version of reality is. And it gets harder and harder to leave or change or whatever needs to be done because we have now drained ourselves into this. So it has to be for something, right? I've given so much of myself. I can't walk away now. I can't risk making changes now because it has to be for something. I've invested so much. And it is draining. It's wildly draining. But it's intentionally draining. That's the rub that we don't get. It's intentionally draining. And the reason it's intentionally draining is because if your environment is kept in constant chaos, if you're running from one fire to another and completely drained all the time of your energy, as soon as you get any moments of peace, you just want to relax and forget about it. You just don't want to deal with all of the crap anymore. So it's like amnesia. It's like you forget about everything. You just want to be in this moment where it's not that bad right now. I can breathe right now. Let me just sit here for a minute. And then before you know it, boom, there's another fire. The reason why that calm state can never last is because after you caught your breath, after your nervous system had time to relax and heal, you would start looking around you and you might start asking yourself, is this what I want? You might start seeing the patterns more clearly when you're not running around like your hair's on fire, right? So we can't have that. We need the chaos because then you're constantly reacting to your environment. There's no proactive steps taking. You're not thinking ahead. You're not able to plan. You're not able to grow. You have to keep responding and reacting like a pinball and a pinball machine. Whatever flipper hits you, that's where you're going. And almost always there were red flags, right? There were red flags in the beginning, and we didn't miss them. We felt them early on. But for all of those five traits, right? They come in and we explain them away, right? We don't want to judge someone, right? God forbid we judge them wrongly or poorly. We focus on their potential, and we we remember their wounds, and we believe that our love and patience will change things. Yeah, we can confuse, Michelle says that we can confuse judgment with discernment. It's so true. It's so true. And the common thoughts that we have, like we might be like, oh, man, they just have such a trigger. They have this anger issue. I know that they didn't mean what they said, but you know, they just have an anger problem. They had a really hard past. So they just don't know how to not have big reactions. They're trying. I know they're trying. Not I see them trying. I know they're trying. Or the truth is, I'm starting to feel like they're trying might be a little performative and not real trying, because one of the things that I see a lot is that people who are stuck in their own patterns that created them in them narcissistic traits or controlling traits or any manipulative traits, they love the self-help world, and they love studying psychology, and they love to get all the terms down because they will project every single thing that they are doing onto you. And then they will use all of that therapy speak to confuse you anymore and make you the problem. So you saying, you know, I feel like you're upset with me about something because they're not looking at you, they're huffing and puffing, and then they turn around and maybe don't tell me how I feel. Oh, yeah, I'm not supposed to do that. That's right. I shouldn't tell people how they feel. Sorry, you're right. Don't tell me. You're not supposed to tell me how I feel. You always think you know everything. If they lie, they will always question if you're lying. If they cheat, they will always question if you're cheating. The best defense is a good offense. So if you are always on the back foot, then you're less likely to be looking at what they're doing because you're constantly trying to prove yourself. Again, rising up, being better, Or my favorite common thought is they have a good heart. But they have a good heart. I've seen their heart. I know they have a good heart. That that can be very true. Most people have a good heart. We don't live with good intentions. We live with how the person shows up in the relationship. And in romantic love relationships, you can find people that you have chemistry with. You can find people that you love. That doesn't mean that that is the person that you can build a life with. Those are two very different things. So I could have all the good intentions in the world, but if I treat people badly, there should be consequences to that. How else will I know that my behavior is hurtful to others or is not acceptable if people just keep giving me a free pass because of my trauma or my stuff? Like that doesn't help anyone. But the truth is, a part of the reason that we're doing it is not for them. It's because we want to be loved. We are afraid that we won't be loved. If we find someone that makes us feel loved, we feel like we'll never, ever, ever, ever find anyone else again that makes us feel that way. So we better hold on to this one no matter what. And we are terrified of confrontation and loss. We're afraid of loss. And a lot of times that gets stoked, right? I remember I remember my ex one time we were just driving and in this truck and he just turned around and said, "You know, you might not be everyone's cup of tea, but to me, you're perfect." Thanks. But the reason is that it's instilling this idea that you're not really lovable, right? You're not really like, I'm the only one that really gets you and sees your value. And who would want to lose that? I know that there's a term. I want to talk about this because there's a term that gets used a lot, and I think it gets used a lot in ways that aren't always accurate. But so the term is trauma bonding. And these relationships tend to be very volatile, right? High highs, low lows, and a cycle of great intensity followed by great pain. And then we get to repair, and then we repeat. And they can be very stimulating, but your body gets attached to that cycle of chaos and then relief, chaos and relief. There was this joke about the cop sees a guy sitting on the corner and he's like beating himself in the head with a hammer. And the cop goes up to him and goes, "Oh, stop. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you hitting yourself in the head with a hammer?" And the guy says, "Because it feels so good when I stop." That's similar to trauma bonding. But typically, what happens is people have gone through something together. And sometimes that can be a way to keep a person, right? So if I'm an unhealthy partner and I meet somebody and I want to keep them, I might make things happen to where we go through something that's very traumatic. And then that becomes the thing that keeps us together. So Jane asked, is that akin to cutting? Um, so cutting comes in when people feel out of control and they start to feel like their pain is so great or their confusion is so great. And this is my understanding of it. I'm sure you can find a lot more information on it, but being able to focus on the pain that is being created by the cutting is a way to redirect all that into one place. And it becomes a way of soothing. But it is when everything feels out of control. Now, I will say that also cutting um, and other self-harm threats are also wielded as ways to gain power. So people can threaten to harm themselves if you are starting to create boundaries around the ways that they're being toxic in your relationship. And then they can threaten self harm. And basically, what they're doing, if you break it down, they're using your love of them against you because that wouldn't work on a stranger. They would just be confused, right? It works because you care about them. So they threaten self harm. And typically, that's the ripcord that gets pulled when they feel like they're losing control. In my experience, my mother, her wrists looked like train tracks. And the reason is that any time that she lost control of a situation, maybe a boyfriend was leaving her or she was experiencing consequences of her actions, she would very performatively cut herself. And then look what you made me do. This is a power move. And it's really it's really so sad and toxic for everyone involved. But it's important to know that that is a possibility of this being a power move because a lot of the language is around if someone wants to harm themselves, then it's your responsibility to get them help or anything. And that can be used against you. So obviously, that's a much deeper topic. And um, there's a lot of information out there that you can get to help you if that's what you're experiencing. I will say that I have an ex that would like when things started getting to the point where I couldn't, I didn't want to be there anymore. And it didn't matter to me what he thought of me because a lot of times that's one of the things that keep us stuck is that we don't want to be seen badly. So we can only leave when they agree that it's okay for us to leave, or else we're a terrible person and they project all these awful things on us. So I had to get to the point where I didn't care what he thought of me anymore. I didn't care what he told people about me. I didn't care what he thought of me. I didn't care about any of it. But when I started getting to that point, he sensed that. So he would lay on the floor in a ball and say he was going to walk off a roof somewhere. And that is so hard. I will say in my case, and I am not saying like I am not giving anyone advice on their situation, but in my situation, having been through what I went through with my mother, I recognized it for what it was, that it wasn't an actual, this wasn't a real threat. This wasn't a real option that this person was considering. And so I guess the best way to say is I just didn't buy into it. I I still carried fear about it because you can never be 100% sure, but I wasn't going to take that on. And I talked to him very straight about how I hope that that's not what he's going to do, but nobody can make him do anything. And it would be really a shame for his mother and the people that care about him, and that he has options, but it was not going to change what was happening between us. I imagine that there was trauma bonding with my first partner, the father of my children, because we were pulled over and arrested, and now we are stuck together, and we're going through these things, right? So we kind of I had to lean on him. My family didn't know anything about how to navigate the legal system or what was good. I mean, it was so yes, but that's also a lot of times we make choices that disempower us, such as now we're going to move in with someone, and the place we're moving into, we can't afford on our own. And so we become financially dependent on that person. Like our whole life kind of has to change in order to be able to make changes to our relationship. So if the threat of actually the relationship ending also has financial ramifications. You could take a job at their company. Like people do so many things that disempower them because the other person is offering them as gifts or connection or ways to be closer. So I heard someone say once that you have to be with someone 18 months before you have any idea of what how the person operates and how compatible you are. And in those 18 months, you have to travel together and go to family events together, experience holidays together, experience, right? Because 18 months is typically a good amount of time. And then you'll have a better view um, before you ever move in together or do things that start um, to join your forces, let's say. So why is it so hard to if we come to the realization, let's say for a romantic relationship, if we come to the realization that we have started to change, right? We have been implementing healthier ways for us to be in this relationship, and the relationship is not getting better. Why is it so hard to leave? Why is it so hard to leave something that we are being treated so poorly in, that is so draining? And some of the reasons are because we tend to and have also been coached to feel responsible. We still have hope. A lot of times people will, I call it self-gaslighting, where they'll go, but remember the good times. What about the good times? And of course, there were good times. You wouldn't be here if there weren't good times. But they might be 20, 10, 20% of your experiences. We fear abandonment. The fear is life will be worse. I know it's bad now, but it'll be worse. And it goes also back to that idea of failure, the fear of this being a failure, of everything that I put into this. I sacrificed so much, I put so much into it. And now what? And look, that doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. Sometimes the hardest relationships we have are with our adult children or our parents. And if it's our adult children, well, then we very much feel responsible, because when they were kids, we were responsible. And then we can talk about guilt and shame. Well, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. The hope is that we did better than our parents, but we always are doing the best we can at that time. We did the best we could with the tools we had, with where we were. Every single one of us is accountable for our own life once we're an adult. So if our parents did things that hurt us or that caused us to have some kind of programming that's not helpful to our life, it is our responsibility then to do something about it. But it often happens that people get to give their life away, the responsibility for their life away, to someone else. So if I'm afraid of taking accountability for my life, I get to blame my parent, right? And now if I blame my parent, it's your fault. I don't have to be accountable. I don't have to do anything different because it's all your fault. And the parent then keeps trying to fix what they can't fix, because we can't fix other people. The best thing that we can do is work on ourselves. Truly. And if you are the parent of an adult child and you find yourself in this dynamic, I highly suggest that you look at how you respond and ask yourself, do I tend to defend or try to explain why I did the things I did, or why what happened happened? Or do I just listen? Because every time you try to defend something, it doesn't matter if you're right or not right, if it's true or if it's not. You're saying that I am not interested in your experience. I want to tell you about my experience. And I believe that by telling you my experience, that you'll have a better perspective and deeper understanding. And you'll go, oh, okay, great. Thanks for telling me that. Now I don't feel bad, but that's not how it works. You have to be able to listen to their experience without trying to fix it or change it or explain it, and allow it to be what it is. Because every time we over-explain, the frustration on their part is you're not listening. You're not willing to hear what my experience was. And it can be painful as an adult to hear the ways in which our child felt lonely or sad or scared or unloved or any of that. That can be so awful, but we have to. We have to be able to allow their experience to be their experience. We don't need to agree that the way their interpretation of what happened is exactly the way we remember it. Or that's unimportant. If you want to pull the poison out of this, you just accept that they had a different experience than you. And you say, I'm ready. When you are ready, you tell them you're ready to hear it, that you can handle it. Because being seen and heard and having someone understand and just say, you know what, that sounds like it was hard. Good question. So Elaine asked, what if your child has narcissistic traits, right? So do you mean like where they rewrite history and make things up, or you can take your you can come off of mute and maybe give me an example because that might help.
Uh, so he really seems to take the stage all the time and try to overpower you in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
My
Bulldozing.
Yeah, bulldozing,
Yeah.
and not doesn't seem to want to understand the other person's point of view, or like it never feels like a discussion. It's
Mm-hmm.
always overpowering.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, it's complicated.
Is it about just general topics? It could be about like social issues or something that he's going through, or is this about experiences as a child?
I don't think it's experiences as a child. I think it's like really a personality trait.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's 30 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just always feel shut down. Um, I'm asking myself, am I just a terrible listener?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that that's it. It's just not even a discussion.
So I have experienced this. Okay. And this particular thing, I don't know about you, is not necessarily a narcissistic trait, because what it can be is just really poor communication skills and dysregulation. And so a lot of us become verbal processors. So the way we understand something better is we find somebody that will put up with it and we talk at them, not to them. And it's really draining and incredibly boring to be on the receiving end of that, because we're constantly looking in the conversation for our role, like our so we're following it, but I don't know where the question is. I don't know where this conversation is necessarily coming from. Do you want my feedback, or are you just wanting me to listen? Like, I don't know what's happening right now. And you haven't told me, and you don't seem clear. You're just going on and on and on and on. And all I want to do is just have this conversation end. Right. So,
I'm going to put that boundary down. Um, and it really saddens me because it's my child.
mhm.
But, um, it's just not enjoyable to be around because it makes me feel invisible.
Right. But nobody can make you feel it. you feel invisible because it is a one sided conversation, but it's not meant to be that way about you. That thought is a choice. If you took yourself out of it and you watch the behavior, and it may not even be just with you, it could be with siblings, it could be with friends, right? So then it's not about you. This is about them. And I would suggest to move away from the idea of a boundary because a boundary is rigid and can push and feeds the very thing you don't want. So if we were to understand it as, oh, my son is a verbal processor. And he thinks these are us having conversations, but these aren't conversations because there's no room for the other person to join in. This is just like getting a dump, like a dumping of information. So, what I have done is when any kind of conversation starts, I will do, I have a few tools that I'll use. One is I might go, hey, um, you seem really passionate about this. I just have a question. Uh, are you looking for any feedback from me? Do you have a question about the topic? Or are you looking for my opinion? Or are you just, curious about something and you're sharing something that you're curious about? Because that is an interrupt to their, like, it makes them suddenly have to ask themselves, why am I going to just spew all this at my mom? Right. Then they might say, oh, if they say, well, I just, it's just something I'm interested in and blah, 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 blah. Right. Then you can say, okay, well, now's not really a good time for me. Right. But I really would love to hear more of your thoughts. But can we do it on Sunday or can we? And you just kind of gently move it along, right? You're redirecting. You can also say, you know what? I realize because here's the thing, like, I realize I do the same thing. I do the same thing. I'm like, why do we all do this? Like the whole family does it to each other. We something like we're passionate about, or we hear something, or something happens, and then we go to the other person. We're like, blah, 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 blah. And what I'm really doing is processing it for myself while I retell it or tell it or explore it at another person. And while it makes me feel good, it's so exhausting and draining and boring for the other person. So once I realized, oh my God, we're a family of verbal processors, then it wasn't personal. It wasn't any real problem. It was just, oh, now that I recognize it, now I can say to my son, hey, if this is true, I mean, I don't know if it's true for you or not, but hey, I tend to notice that sometimes I will get excited or passionate about something that I heard, or I'll have a question about something, or I'll be dealing with an uncomfortable situation, and then I'll go to somebody and I'll just talk at them about it. And I'm not really asking for anything. And I realize that I'm just using them as a placeholder for me to process this. So if I've done that to you, I'm so sorry because that's exhausting. And what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start trying to do that for myself. Realizing like I got to process, I can't use other people to do this. I'm going to start processing for myself. And we don't make it about them at all. And then if it comes up where it's you can say, "Oh my God, are you Do you think you're a verbal processor too? Right?
Well, I can definitely say that I am probably the professor because we of the empathetic, questions like, and the why is this happening, or why are you
Right.
so angry, or what happened in the situation, and um, I don't think my son is like that. He has so much, everything comes out angrily and
Yes.
loudly, you know.
Yes. Because
Yes,
he's dysregulated
yeah, dysregulated. Um,
and he doesn't feel heard because we're not listening because it's boring. And so then he gets more frustrated and comes with more stuff, and the same thing repeats.
yeah, it's a bad cycle that we're in, and from then I get called being too sensitive because I get upset because I'm constantly being shut down. So then I'm like, I just need to leave this conversation.
Right.
I need to go.
But how cool is you get to explain to him that you figured something out, that your family tends to be verbal processors and you've been on both sides of it, right? And but you only really speak from your experience. Don't tell him he's a verbal processor. Tell the story from your perspective, right? And I know I've done this to other people, and I know that it's exhausting when other people do it to me because I don't really know what they want, and I have to like try to like listen and parse it out. And one-sided conversations are not conversations. So, and I realize I've done this. So if I've done it to you, I'm sorry. I'm really going to try to process my own stuff. And then if there's pieces of it or questions I have that I want your input directly, I'll come to you and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because that's easy for your brain to go, oh, a question, or oh, she wants my feedback, or he wants my feedback. That's easy for your brain to do. The just fire hose of information is no.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm at the end of an angry fire hose.
Yes. Yeah. So every time you try to explain or push or go, I can't or I should, it's feeding the thing you don't want.
It is, and that makes me feel very stuck and in fear
Yes.
of the relationship. I don't want to lose the relationship. I want the complete opposite.
Yes. So look, here's a way to connect. You're both the same. In some ways, you're both the same. It shows up a little differently, but like now you can have empathy and compassion and understanding about what he's doing because in some ways you've done it yourself. And now it's not about setting a boundary, but recognizing. And then you get to go, oh, hey, look. So, question. Do you think, do you have a question for me in everything you're sharing? Like, I want to engage with you, right? But I just need to know what my role is. What are you looking for my role to be? Right? Do you want me to give my opinion on what you share? Do you have a question about it? Is there like, what is it? And if he's like, well, I don't know, I just want, so it makes it hard for me to take in this much information without any direction. So I have a request. Would you be willing to maybe go and think about what it is about this that made you want to bring it to me, and maybe you can start doing the processing of it or the more greater deeper understanding of it and then come back to me when you realize why me in particular you brought it to me, if there is a reason, if you want, right?
I think explaining that it makes it difficult for me.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, and it's not your fault. I do it too. It's not your fault. We got to be on the same level. No judgment.
Well, it's just, spinning out of control with the anger fire hose coming at me. And then I believe that it's my believe, or it's just my nature to want to help and,
Right.
and unravel it somehow. But you can't even get a word in edgewise.
Right.
It's like talking to the hand all the time.
Yeah,
And
because he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't. He has no idea that this is what it's like on the other side. He
well,
has
he
no idea.
and we just both end up angry, and
Yes, because you don't listen. You
it's
don't care about.
toxic because
Yes.
we can't communicate.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Been there,
I
done that.
I but
So
thank
now I realize I don't have to, I'm not obliged to stand there in front of the fire hose. And that, the feeling that I am, is what's creating separation between me and my son. It's creating a bigger separation. I have to stop doing that. And I can't make it his fault or about him. It's like, look, it's hard for me. I would be like, look, I have ADD. Like, I can't do this. It's too much information for me. Like, it hurts my brain. I would make it all about me. So I want to be able to have interesting conversations with you. I want to hear about things you're passionate about. It's helpful to me if you go and boil it down, think about it, go through it, and figure out where I come in the conversation. What do you, how can we meet halfway? No boundary, no nothing. This is actually an opportunity to be closer because we have to get rid of the resistance that we carry. Because what you resist persists. You feed the very thing that you don't want. So when people that I love start to do that to me, right? They could say things that I 10,000% disagree with everything coming out of their mouth. But I'm not disagreeing with them because that creates separation between me and a person that I love. And what does it matter anyway? It's just ideas. And their ideas might be 100% different than they are today, 10 years from now, just like my ideas change. But I love the person. I love the person. So if this creates separation, I don't want to engage in it anymore. So I'm not going to resist it. I'm not going to anything, but I am going to shape it, but not from, you can't do this to me, but I understand better now. I understand I've done the same thing in different ways. So now I have ways to mitigate this and we get to stay in better energy together. We are more relational now. And the people that I have done this with in my life that I love dearly, our relationship has always gotten better. And they tend to trust me more, and I trust them more.
I can only hope.
Well, we don't do it for that, right? We just do like that's the byproduct, and it may or may not happen. But we can only do the part that we know is healthy, which is okay. I have to find ways to relate, be relational, and also let myself off the hook because every time if I feel like, oh my God, here he goes. Oh no. How do I get out of here?
So, the avoidance now
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
doing that only causes me pain because I try to stay in the moment, but I get scared about the future. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to have him in my life. We're never going to be able to communicate.
Right.
And then my heart just starts bleeding.
Yes. And he feels that. And then he's angry because you're not available for him. You're checked out, you're whatever. And it just feeds his feelings and his fears. Right. So everyone's projecting this. And so these conversations are now the litmus test for your relationship. And it's just a conversation. It's not, it's not a helpful conversation, but all we need to do is affect that. And boom, that's not a non-issue now. I think I talked about in the first one how I think I talked about this. My relationship with my adult daughter changed because she used to call and vent to me all the time. And it was just so draining and toxic. And finally, we had to talk. But I was going to be different. So when she called, I love her to death. I love, like, are we not going to be close anymore because I don't listen to her vent and bitch? No, of course not. That's just not, that's not closeness. So I would just redirect. I would just be like, oh my gosh, I got to go. I'm sorry, but I'll talk to you later. Like, I'm not leaving. I'll talk to you later. Let's talk after work tomorrow, whatever it is. I'm not mad. I'm not pushing. I'm not, how dare you? Right?
Yeah, the empath qualities, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think that he understands that when you're not this way, when you don't operate this way,
Mm-hmm.
it's really difficult for other people to understand.
It's not their job. It's not their job. It can't be their job. Because if we make it their job, then all we will experience is pain and suffering every time they don't show up the way we feel they should. It's a setup. The calls coming from inside the house. It's a setup.
Too sensitive.
Right. Right. Well, we're too sensitive because we are making it other people's jobs to regulate our nervous system.
Mm,
That is a lose lose, and lose in ways way bigger than in the moment. We lose trust in each other because if I'm responsible for your feelings, or if you feel responsible for my feelings, then I can't be honest because I have to run everything through how you are going to perceive what I'm doing or saying. I've been made responsible for someone else.
okay.
And it doesn't work for you. It just puts you in a position to be constantly disappointed and
Yes.
constantly feel a familiar feeling, maybe that nobody understands, nobody gets me, everybody thinks I'm too sensitive. And it just feeds that over and over. And that's a separation.
Yes.
So you have to be fully accountable. And that means if you want other people also to allow you your feelings and you to have dominion over what you do and what you do, then they have to have the same. Like they have to be able to be safe to share how they feel and stuff, and you be willing to hear it but not take it on. That's what we do. We take everything on. And then everything becomes about us, right? Because we're managing us, we're managing you, like, and if this is not going well, or then it's our fault, or nobody sees me, nobody gets me, nobody acknowledges how hard I'm working over here trying to keep everything flowing, and it just puts us in a lose-lose position. And because every time we continue that feeling, we create more separation.
Really good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. And I say this as because I've been on all sides of all of these things. um, yeah. Oh, Lisa said, do you need to be heard, helped, or hugged around the whole verbal processing thing? Like, it's a good question. Do you need to be heard? Do you need to be helped? Or need to be hugged? I'm stealing that, Lisa.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, she said she just realized she's a verbal processor and should probably inform the other person of what I need out of the three H's. I love that. So let me see where. So the big reframe around these relationships is that because so many times we carry shame around our unhealthy relationships, but shame blocks growth. It blocks being able to step outside of that story loop of shame and see a bigger picture, especially when we're talking about people like our children or people that we love so dearly, right? Um, because we didn't choose these dynamics because there's something wrong with us. This is how our nervous system was trained to survive. It's just that now we're adults, it's not working for us in the way it did in a dynamic where we don't have power. When you're in a dynamic that you don't have power, how you protect yourself in that dynamic is going to be very different than how you want to show up when you do have power as an adult. Would you agree? So some of those things that we learn can actually be kind of toxic as adults. So what healing looks like in these relationships and romantic relationships, um, we start choosing relationships that have more reciprocity. In our family, we stop over functioning and feeling responsible for everything and everyone. In friendships, we look for friendships that fill us up, right? Like that also have a mutual benefit, right? And that I want to be sure that I'm saying that that doesn't mean that it's tit for tat or like you did this and I have to do that. Like you could do more in the friendship than the other person, and it but the friendship that you have, so worth it, right? Would do it, show up for it every day. That's the part that matters. In business, sometimes or our career, we just need to stop overgiving and start seeing ourselves as an equal player. Like we are here. We take sometimes we feel invisible. Like, hello, I'm here. We are here. And so we have to start treating ourselves with the respect and dignity that we are here and that we are a part of this group, and we start showing up and taking accountability for ourselves. We start being honest and truthful instead of harboring resentments or trying to manipulate people to get what we want. We can just start to share more, and that's not confrontational. Somebody asked me a really good question, and maybe you guys are going to like have people that this reminds you of. Somebody said that they know someone who is very abrasive, right? They say things that are very abrasive and they're very um, they're very outgoing and loud, and they say these things that people are like are shocked that they say, and like I said, they're abrasive and people love them. And this person is so confused. They're like, I don't understand how that person is so well liked when that's how they show up. And I said, you know why? Because they're congruent. They're congruent. Nobody's got to guess what they're thinking. It's flying out of their mouth, right? All that work we do to try and read between the lines, or like, we don't have to do that around this person. And how refreshing. How refreshing. We might think some of the things they say are awful, but gosh, they're nice to be around, aren't they? Because they're just congruent. We want to be more congruent. It makes it easier for us and for everyone else. And look, doing this work on ourselves there's a big cost in not doing it, right? Because unchecked codependency impacts your energy, your time, your self respect, your self trust, your income, your ability to grow, your creativity, your ability to receive, your capacity for joy and peace. I mean, this bleeds into every aspect of your life. Because when you're over giving, over functioning, and overly responsible for everyone and everything, that's where all your energy goes. It's just drained. And a lot of times, nobody's asking you to do these things, right? We just step into the role. So, look, these same patterns that have kept you stuck in unhealthy relationships will keep you stuck from your freedom, your success, and your joy. But healing it isn't about losing that heart based part of yourself. It's about finally including yourself in the whole picture in a way that's honest and congruent. So look, if any of this resonates with you guys or anybody listening, and you do want to start taking action and freeing yourself from this paradigm that you find yourself in, I have a new offer coming out soon. And so this is something that I've been working on for about 2 years because I love working one on one with people, and I see the changes that work creates. And but not everybody can do that work. So I've been working on a way that still has a piece of the in-person stuff, but also are really specific tools that when you learn them and apply them, the impact just crosses every aspect of your life. And these are things that people can do in their own time. So I'm going to open and share all of that on March 14th. And I'm excited about it because it makes it so that more people can be introduced to this work and start bringing this into the world and the positive effects in people's life. Like it's that kind of butterfly effect, talk about like when you fix one thing, we see so many huge things wrong in the world, but honestly, if we all just did our own work, the world would change. So if you're here today or you're listening to this recording and you aren't on my First Fridays mailing list, you can go to christinedixonmentor.com and sign up for First Fridays on the Work With Me page. Because everyone that's signed up there is going to get early access to what I'm going to be releasing. And look, people often feel like the things that have held them back in life, they point to maybe lack of training or education, lack of money or influence, lack of opportunity. But all of those things are available to all of us. And with energy, growth, and focus, all of those things are available. But what we've talked about today, this is what holds people back. And this also is what some people that really do well, let's say in their business, have like success in one area of life, but then the other areas, like maybe their relationships, are a mess. This is the holistic view, meaning whole. And the only way to get to be able to enjoy and experience it all is by seeing it as a whole. So, everything that I have shared with you guys today, every tool, everything is what I learned and I continue to use every day of my life going forward automatically. And look, if I can turn my life around, both personally in my relationships and professionally, anybody can. Anybody can. If I can do it, anybody can. So I just want to thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much for showing up. I appreciate you. Any and all feedback is always welcome. And just to give you an insight, the topic for April's First Friday is going to be on this current trend of going no contact because I want to talk about what it looks like when it is necessary, how it can be weaponized, and when going no contact is actually a way of bypassing your own growth. So that's going to be our topic for April. I love you guys so much. And if anybody has any questions or you want to maybe have a discovery call and talk about any ways that I can help you incorporate these things even more, there's a discovery call button on my website. All right. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next time. Bye.